Thank you, Tunica. Welcome, everybody. Lots of announcements, lots of really exciting things going on in our church community. My name's Matthew. I'm the lead pastor here, so I'm going to be talking for the next few minutes or so. Just want to refer back to a couple of things. One that Tunica mentioned and one that Steve English mentioned. And that is the Harvest Festival. Let's just invite as many people to that as we can. Okay, it's going to be a great event. Do take the flyers, invite your family, your friends. We've got lots of capacity to accommodate people, so come along next Saturday. And then regarding what Steve was saying about the play we're going to do during Advent, we're still working out some of the details on that. Like we're going to probably run it for like 3 shows over one of the early weekends in December, but we're just going to fine-tuning all that. But the goal there is that we're going to invite our family and friends, but also we're going to be, we're probably going to charge for it, like $5 a head, because it's going to be worth coming to, and we're going to advertise it to the local community. And I think we're going to pack this place out with lots of people coming through our church who we can really just extend God's love to. Okay, it's not, the play is just a play, okay? It's not a religious thing. We're not trying to, trick people into coming to church. We just want to demonstrate God's love and act in a really hospitable way to people and give them a great Christmas experience through producing a high-quality play, right? That's what we're trying to do. So, as that time approaches, again, we're going to have a lot of people coming through our doors, and I think there's something we can all be doing is thinking about how can we include others in whatever we feel we have benefited from being part of this community. I'm assuming the fact that you're here now means you've benefited in some way from this community. It's not all guilt, right? That's not the only motivation for coming to church. We're benefiting from something good. So let's think about how we can share that and include others in it as well. Okay, we are in kind of the middle, heading towards the end of a series at the moment called Transforming Relationships, and we're going to continue that theme today. The title for today is Compassionate Presence, and we're going to talk specifically today about listening, how we listen to people effectively or ineffectively. And listening is one of those things where we were talking last week about, we've kind of heard it all before, right? Most of the things we talk about during this series and in many of the things we talk about at Cedar Ridge, we've heard them before. And when we talk about listening, I can almost feel the collective eye roll, of listening skills. I mean, how many people have done listening skills at work or had some listening training? Yeah, quite a few. I thought it might be a few more than that, actually. But, it's the sort of stuff that we read about. It's a lot of it. We find a lot about listening in self-help books and that kind of thing. We may have had some training in that at work. We talked about it here. But as we were saying last week, we're not just interested in knowing stuff. We want to live stuff. We want to practice it. So, in order to practice things that are really important, we kind of have to remind ourselves of them periodically, right? If you play a musical instrument, probably you practice every day. If you're in a sporting team or something like that, you're practicing perhaps not every day, but on a regular basis, because you have to keep working at the basics, keep working at things in order for them to become second nature and maintain those skills as well. And I think that's true when it comes to relationships. So we're going to talk a little bit about listening, but I want to take maybe a slightly different approach to this. And as I said, the title today is Compassionate Presence. So what we're really talking here is kind of expanding a little bit on something we mentioned last week about dwelling. Do you remember last week we talked about the passage in the beginning of John's Gospel where it says that Christ dwelt with us, became flesh and dwelt with us and was full of grace and truth. And we talked about those 3 things: dwelling, grace and truth. Well, dwelling, being with people, can be a really positive thing, right? It can also sometimes be a negative thing. Let's face it, we've had times where maybe we spent the evening with somebody and we go home and think, what a fantastic time. We may not have done anything special or had any particularly great conversation. It was just good being with those people. Have you ever gone home after the end of the evening and felt worn out? Right? Or just drained, or like, oh my gosh, that wasn't a great time, right? So our times with one another can be good, or they can be not so good. So we're talking here about how can we dwell in a really positive way. And there's something I think that's, to me, is really fascinating about human beings, and that's the fact that we, of all species on the planet, have this capacity, uniquely, to be able to share our story. right? We have words, we have language. That's probably what really sets us apart. It's like this God-given quality. It's something of the divine. The fact that we can speak with such nuance and detail and specificity. I mean, lots of animals can communicate, but we have this ability to make one another laugh. We can hurt one another. We can cut to the chase in a conversation. We can talk in really emotional terms and express the longings of our heart, the feelings of our heart. We have this amazing gift of speech, of language. We have this amazing capacity to share our story with one another. That seems, it's almost godlike. And yet, at the same time, we can miss the words of one another in any particular context. Words can be spoken but not be necessarily really heard. I mean, all the gift of language can be channeled into communicating something of great import from within, but because the other person isn't necessarily listening very well, it just kind of gets lost. And that's a tragedy, it seems. That's a tragedy. That it's like we're wasting this beautiful gift that we have. So if we could become better at listening to those words, if we could really hear where they're coming from, not necessarily just hearing the words themselves, but what's behind those words, the story behind those words, the emotion behind those words. If we could grow in our capacity to do that, then it seems almost inevitable that we'll grow in our capacity for transforming relationships, for deeper relationships. If we could perhaps, in the relationships where we want to intentionally grow closer to people, there are people in our lives that we feel like, wow, I want more of that relationship, right? We want to grow closer to them. If we could practice better listening, we're going to grow deeper in that relationship. But also, in a more general sense, if we could listen better to Joe Public kind of thing, like everybody we encounter, it might be that we're missing things during the day. We mentioned this a little bit last week. When people kind of say something that has this, it's just a little thing. It's a small expression of annoyance or pain or joy or despair or disillusionment, whatever. And there's just an expression of it, and it comes from something much bigger and deeper. And through listening, we can draw that person out and maybe hear their story rather than just ignore it or pass over it or skip over it. So, we could become safe places for people. We could become settings, scenarios, contexts where other people can actually begin to share their story, perhaps for the first time. Okay, so these things are, I think, really important. We're going to look at a scripture, again, very familiar scripture, from the second chapter of Philippians. And I want us, as we're reading this, I want us to think about it in two contexts. One is something very specific. Okay, so this guy, Paul, is writing to a specific church at a specific time about specific issues. It's very specific. But he's also raising some general things, some big issues, broader issues. And so we're going to kind of think about those in particular. But here's what he's saying. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Okay, so what he's doing here, he's talking to a group of people and saying, I want you to be united. He's going to address some issues about how they can be one together. Right? So that's a specific thing to those people, but I think he's kind of addressing the human race, if you like. He's talking here about unity, about connection, about belonging, and in a more general way, because we know that humanity is not one, right? There's disharmony, there's disconnection, there's all kinds of conflict among human beings. So let's bear that in mind as we hear what he has to say about this. So here's his kind of solution, if you like, or his recommendation. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Okay, so what he's saying there is, okay, in order for there to be unity, there's a key ingredient here, which is not putting yourself first. If we're all more interested in our own needs than other people's needs, it's going to lead to discord. Okay, I think we can relate to that. If we're obsessed about what I need to get out of a relationship, we're probably not going to be able to contribute to a relationship, right? So if we're thinking about what we're getting rather than what we're giving, then that's going to cause problems. I think we can probably relate to that. Let's not confuse this language with what we were talking about a few weeks ago about loving and accepting ourselves. I don't think he's saying to be united you really need to despise yourself. He's saying you need to think about other people and put other people better. Perhaps when we accept and love ourselves, we're more empowered actually to let go of our own needs and actually think about other people more, right? In a context of self-acceptance, we can love others more. So I think it's consistent with what we were talking about the other day too. Now he moves on and gives us the example of Jesus. Again, he gets a bit more mystical, and he quotes now, we're not going to see this really so much in the English translation, but the language now shifts from kind of prose, narrative if you like, to poetic. And it seems that he's using a hymn or a poem that pre-exists. You know, somebody's written this before, and it's probably well known, and he's kind of quoting it to give them this example of why putting others first is important. He compares it to Jesus. Your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. And you know, he continues there to sort of with this sort of worship of Jesus. Now I want to come back to this issue of him comparing us to Jesus, or saying we need to take this example of Jesus, where Jesus became nothing. The term for that in the Greek is kenosis. It's Jesus emptied himself. Okay, and I think we can, you know, this is obviously talking about the incarnation. This in a very mystical way, and we've been saying how the incarnation is kind of a theme for us in this whole idea of relationships, of being present to one another, of sharing our stories with one another. God being with us and living with us and accepting us and identifying with our humanity is what saves us. It's like saying, I validate you, I'm with you, I'm here for you. And so this sort of more mystical expression of the incarnation here is being explained through Jesus kind of emptying himself in order to be present to us. That term, kenosis, emptying, I think is really important here. It's not saying, I don't think, that we all need to become unworthy worms. You know, we all need to think of ourselves as like nothing. But rather, could we, in the context of a relationship, kind of empty ourselves, and what I think that might mean is sort of put ourselves aside for a moment. Okay, so let's think about this for a moment. If I'm in a relationship, if I'm obsessed with what I need and what I want and how I'm feeling right now, it's much more difficult for me to be present to that person's needs. Right? If that person shares something with me that I might feel is a bit critical of me, if I'm guarding my own needs, what am I going to do? I'm going to jump in and defend myself rather than listen to what they're saying. If that person's sharing something with me and it makes me angry, what am I going to do if I'm sort of still in possession of my anger? I'm going to respond in an angry way rather than listening to what they're saying. If they share something with me that's nothing to do with me but triggers an emotion in me that reminds me of something bad that's happened to me, and I've got all my stuff there, then I'm going to start saying, yeah, well, that's nothing, that happened to me the other time, and we switch this conversation to ourselves, right? And I'm no longer present to that person, I'm no longer listening to that person. What if in our relationships, and in, very intentionally, especially when somebody is sharing something with us, whether it's some feedback and criticism, or just sharing pain, or joy, or suffering, or hope, or disappointment, or disillusionment, or despair, or whatever it is they're sharing with us, what if we could empty ourselves and just kind of have all our stuff, just kind of put it over there and be totally present to that person, and able to hear what they're saying. We're able to, as it were, kind of step into their shoes or step into their skin and kind of be there present with them. rather than in possession of all our stuff here, out of which we then react and are not able to really be present. I think that's one of the things that this passage is getting at. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about how do you do that? How can we practice that way of being present to somebody else? How can we be truly compassionately present to somebody in settings like that? And there's three well-known things. I didn't make these up. I'm no genius, but three things that are well documented and well evidenced that really help contribute to compassionate listening, active listening, and they are warmth, empathy, and respect. Warmth, I think, kind of speaks for itself. If somebody is sharing something with us and we're coming across as disinterested, uninterested, bored, offended, or like we just don't really care, that's not going to help listening, right? So now, I think it was Moravian, he was the UCLA, I think, somewhere in California, psychologist who did the research on when people are talking about their feelings, whether or not they felt heard. Okay, so this is a very subjective thing. Their understanding that they were heard was dependent on 55% on non-verbal issues. Right, so when people are talking about their feelings, 55% of it is non-verbal communication. And of the other verbal communication, most of that is based on tone of voice. Okay, so over half of our communication in these settings is non-verbal. It's like body posture and the way we're coming across non-verbally. And the other half, most of it, language-wise, is tone of voice as opposed to the words themselves. Words themselves amount to 7% of the content, right? So how we are present to somebody, just our physical presence, is going to be helpful. If one of my kids tries to share something with me and I'm like this, right? That's not really a receptive position. Okay, so now we're not going to go too much into that. There's some opportunity in the material this week to discuss some of those things, but I think those are very important issues. They're maintaining eye contact with people, but not staring, right? Things that can help us just physically create space that's more easy for people sharing. Let's jump ahead to respect. I think we can all kind of relate to respect as well. That if we're not respectful or we don't feel respected, we're not going to share. If we're not confident somebody's going to maintain confidence, we're not going to share. If somebody's trying to fix us, it's disrespectful to try and fix somebody when they share something with us, isn't it? I mean, unless they've asked for some advice or they've specifically said, could you give me point me in the right direction here? If they're just sharing a feeling, we try to fix them, then really what we're saying is, you're obviously incompetent. And, I've just worked out the answer and you couldn't do that, so I'm going to share it with you, right? I mean, that's not necessarily going on cognitively here, but that's what we feel. And we don't feel understood because it's like, well, I could have said that. I mean, I could have worked that piece out. I wasn't asking you for an answer or a solution. I just wanted to share something here. We'll come back to that in a moment. Another way of being disrespectful is to judge somebody, right? Somebody can share something, we say, well, it's obvious why you've got a problem. It's because you've done this, that, and the other. It's because of your political persuasion, or your religious persuasion, or you're this, or that, or you're the other. All the different things that we all actually, we love to judge because it makes us feel better about ourselves if we can put somebody else down. It's kind of sick and toxic, but so there's a temptation for us always there to judge and think, well, this is the reason they've got a problem, and kind of label them. And that's a great recipe for somebody to not share anything whatsoever, because none of us want to get judged, none of us want to get labeled that way. Okay, so warmth and respect, I think, are fairly obvious things. Let's unpack this thing with empathy a little bit. Okay, so what is empathy? Now, there's all sorts of ways of defining empathy, and sometimes people will say we should be empathetic and not sympathetic. It all comes down to semantics, if you ask me. It depends what we mean by those words. And what I mean by empathy, or what we're going to talk about regarding empathy, is being present compassionately to somebody. It's being with somebody, rather than being an advice giver, being a fixer. It's being willing to go to that emotional dark place. Let's assume it is a dark place, although maybe sharing something positive or joyful with us, but it's being willing to say, I'm just going to go there with you, and I'm going to be there with you. And I'm not going to fix it, I'm not going to solve it, I'm not going to come up with an answer for you, I'm not going to let it make me feel anxious, I'm not going to be afraid to go there, I'm going to just be there with you. I'm going to be with you in your pain and identify with you. That's what empathy is about. And I think we find it hard because we instinctively, I think, want to make things better. Right? We all want to make things better. Partly we want to make things better because we feel uncomfortable when somebody shares something. Right? So one of our ways of dealing with somebody sharing something vulnerable in their story with us is to kind of dismiss it. We could joke about it, or just ignore it, or change the subject. I mean, those are not too subtle ways. But other ways that we struggle with it are because it makes us feel uncomfortable. Because to identify with that person, we actually have to acknowledge that we ourselves have experienced pain. Right? By being empathetic, we go into that person saying, I'm a fellow human being, I'm another human being like you, and I have experienced pain. Not necessarily this exact kind of pain, but I'm a fellow pain bearer. And so it kind of awakens in us our own pain. And again, if we've not dealt with that, or we don't have some kind of a handle on that, it can freak us out. We just don't want to go there. We just don't want to go to that place. It's too intimate, it's too difficult. It's just like, no, stuff it all away. And so we don't actually empathize with that person. We're not able to be present in that space with that person. And I think we know when somebody's with us, right? We know when somebody is present. We know when somebody's at that place of acceptance and presence with us, rather than a place of judgment, a place of fixing, a place of panic, their own fear or whatever, their own defensiveness. Where you're sharing something that is not actually about them, but they're trying to explain it or defend why they're different or whatever it is, because it's evoked something. You think, man, we weren't talking about you, we were talking about me, but something's been evoked in them because it's made them feel insecure, right? We all struggle, I think, with these issues. So is it possible for us to empty ourselves, to say, okay, to put those things aside and come and be in that moment, in that place with that person? I think we can practice, this is like what we talked about at the beginning of the series, we can practice these things. We also need, which is a sort of a doing thing, an effort thing, we also, I think, need a surrender thing, which is saying, God, help me to be that kind of a person. Help me to be the kind of person that can put my own issues aside in order to be totally present to that other person. Now, we're going to just, to demonstrate some of these things, we're going to do a little bit of role play, and everybody loves role play, right? I mean, it's never toe curling, right? That's not my experience. Role play is usually a little bit toe curling, but we have a special guest this morning who's going to do the role play with me, and that is my youngest son, Oliver Dyer. So Oliver's going to come. Let's give him a big round of applause. I'm not leaving. I'm just getting some chairs here. Okay, so Ollie is bringing up a French press of coffee, because something we like to do is drink coffee together. Oh, I only got that. So, there we go. You can move that a bit. So we're going to try and recreate a little scenario where we might have a little chat. So do you want to do the honours, Ollie, with the coffee there? So we would, after school or early evening, sit down and have a cup of coffee, and we'll just have a little chat about how did the day go and what's going on. He'll give me a bit of advice about the next week's message and that kind of thing. You know how it is, that sort of stuff. And then we'll have a little bit of coffee together. Now, you got that one? Thanks for the chat. Now, Ollie, we haven't got any creamer. Ollie is a bit of a wuss. He has to put creamer in his, but, whereas I just drink it like this. That's true.
Dad, I don't really like you.
Oh, you need a microphone. So you need a microphone.
Could you not call me a wuss in front of...
Oh, come on, I was only joking. I was only joking.
Like, it's not nice. I mean, I think that.
Well, don't be so sensitive. I think you're being a bit sensitive. Okay, so that's point one. Okay, so what was going on? So we're just going to do a few little things here. What was going on there? Was I listening to all of them? No, I was being dismissive, right? So I wasn't. He was saying something which is he was expressing pain, right? He was saying by calling him a wuss, which I shouldn't do. I had hurt him, and the point there is that I hurt him, whether I intended that or not. I need to hear that. Whereas, what was I doing? What would you say I was doing, and why? Anybody? Insensitive. I was being insensitive. Yeah. So I wasn't identified. I wasn't in that place of, oh, he's in pain. I'm doing something else. Yeah.
You're also being defensive.
Yeah, being defensive, right? I don't want him to think that. Well, no, I'm not a mean person. Well, I wouldn't hurt you. So it must be your problem, not mine. And I think we do that. I mean, that's a little crazy example, but we do that kind of thing a lot. I think if we're feeling threatened, we put it back on the other person. So don't be so insensitive. Hey, I was only joking. I mean, how many times does I was only joking get us off the hook on a bunch of things, even when those things can be pretty painful, right? So, okay. So let's start. So, you've been back at school now about 6 weeks, right? 6 weeks or so. So tell us a little bit about, or tell me a little bit about how the school year's going. Hold the mic close.
Okay. It's been going okay. I don't really like biology though. It's kind of you get a lot of. She makes us take a lot of notes on these chapters that we read, and then even though she makes us spend hours taking notes, she takes them away from you to grade. So my teacher's kind of.
Okay, so what's going on there? We've got technology, right? So we all have this. That's another pretty obvious one. We have so many more distractions now, I think, from that prevent us from listening to people, because we carry around the capacity to listen to millions of people at a time, actually, in our pockets, on our cell phones or our smartphones. And that is, I think, potentially a really destructive force in relationship settings. I mean, think about it. How many times have you been trying to tell somebody something and they've glanced even at their phone? Or what about this one, where you're in the middle of talking and the phone goes off and they answer it? I know that's sort of, everybody's got a different etiquette that doesn't stand on that, but it's kind of like, really? I mean, if it's like, you're getting a call from your long-lost brother or something who's only called you for the first time in 5 years, fair enough. But, usually it's not that important. And it's like, could we practice just being more present in that situation with the real live person in the room? All right, so, what were you talking about again?
I was talking
about school, right? Yeah.
Schools, yeah. I was talking about how my teacher is, my biology teacher is really, really annoying because she always complains.
Annoying?
Yeah, annoying. She always complains, and she gives us.
Well, what are you doing wrong?
Well, she says that we're behind in our class, but
how did you get behind?
Yeah, well, I don't know, because I don't think it's our fault, because we don't do less work than we're supposed to. Like, we just sit down and do the work that she gives us, but usually she stops the class to, like...
Well, how are you going to catch up?
I don't know.
I'm going to get on that. Okay, so what's going on there? Okay, we're giving away some really easy ones to start with, and then we're going to get into the heavy juicy. What's going on there? Pretty obvious, right? No empathy. I'm not listening. I'm not listening to what he's saying. I'm interrupting. Things like interrupting. What about this one? Asking a question and then answering it yourself, or finishing people's sentences for them. And, we can all think about other people that do this to us, right? But how often do we, like, what do you think is going on? Why am I interrupting him?
You presume that the teacher's right and he's wrong?
Because
You presume he's wrong?
Because I'm presuming he's wrong and the teacher's right. That's a possibility. Yeah.
I think because you're substituting your concerns as a parent,
Yeah.
to guide them for his concerns as a person, not
Yes.
as a parent.
So I don't know if you heard that. So I'm substituting my concerns as a parent for his concerns as a person sharing something with me. I'm worried that he's going to fail at school. I'm worried that he's not going to do well. Some of that is because I'm worried for him because I love him. Some of that is because it's the family reputation, all those kind of things, right? I mean, if we're really honest about why we're worried about certain things, it's like, a lot of it comes back down to our own fears and our own anxieties, or it might be, maybe I didn't do well at school and I don't want that to happen to him and I'm projecting that in here. So we panic and we start, but we bring all our stuff into it. So part of listening is being conscious that we have all that stuff, and then practicing thinking, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to empty myself. I'm going to put this to one side. Okay, so there's just a few sort of things. Now we're going to talk actually though about a very real situation that is kind of painful, and we're just going to talk about something that's happened to our family. And Ollie's going to just give a little bit of background first, so you have some context, and then we're going to. But he's going to tell me the story, so you have some context, and then we're going to do some listening.
So it was a kind of rough summer because when we were going on vacation down to Florida, and we spent about 10 hours driving down to just stop off at North Carolina, and then within 20 minutes of touching down, we got a call saying that my mom's dad was in really bad health. So that kind of cast a huge shadow on the whole thing, and
and very, very seriously ill, right?
yeah, not looking good. So that was pretty rough to begin with. When we went down there, after all this stuff, we ended up trying to continue. So we went down to Florida, and when we got there a few days in, we got a call from this kennel that we put our cat in, that they had lost our cat as well. So they had lost our cat, and it really added insult to injury, and on vacation. So we were all excited about, having fun as a family, going down to Florida, and then two pretty bad things, and we still haven't found Frankie, our cat.
Yeah, so she's been missing now. We've kind of given up that we'll ever find her again, right? She's been on about 4 months now. So yeah, so as Ollie said, we put our cat, entrusted our cat to some people, professionals, and they somehow managed to lose our cat. So, Ollie, tell us a little bit about that, like when we came back and what happened and how you sort of share some of your feelings about that with us, and what went on.
Well, once we got back, we started looking for Frankie around the kennel and different places, because they hung up flyers and they got calls, but we never ended up finding her, and it was just very irritating because you didn't know when to give up. You don't know when it's just pointless to keep on trying to look, but you feel like that's.
Well, we did everything we could.
Yeah, we did. I wish we could have. I wish we could.
When I was out there, I went out just about every night for 2 weeks. I just don't know if there's anything more we could have done.
You never know. There could have been something we might have been able to do, but
there just wasn't enough time.
Yeah, maybe. But, it just, I don't know, I just wish I knew what else I could have done.
So let's pause there. What went on there? Anything? Yes? Yeah, I was interrupting. What else was I doing? Steve?
You're trying to cut it off before you share how much it hurt.
Yeah.
Your solution or your...
Yeah. So I cut him off before he could really express how it hurt. But why did I cut him off? Like...
It seemed like maybe you were feeling culpable yourself for what happened.
Right.
And that issue, it got rejected.
Yeah, so what was happening there, and let me say this is a real situation. So Ollie's there talking about, isn't there something else we could do? Is there something else we could do? Did we do enough to try and find our cat? And I'm feeling responsible for that. I'm feeling like I'm reacting like he's saying, Dad, you personally did not do enough to find our cat, and the reason I'm sad is because you've let me down. That's how I'm responding, rather than, and so I'm responding out of defense and justifying myself before he's even accused me of anything, and I've shut him down. He's now not able to share what he's sharing, and I've really said, I'm not giving you permission to feel bad. I'm not giving you permission to feel that sadness, because your sadness is making me feel bad. Don't do that to me. Right? So that's my stuff kind of quashing his feelings. Let's continue on. So we're just going to do this a few more minutes, and then we'll wrap up.
Continue.
So just about the story with
Yeah, so we kept on looking for her, but every time every time that we'd go out and call her name, and I'd have a cat food box and start shaking it. And the more that we went out and looked for her, it just got more and more like hopeless.
Yeah.
And it's just very frustrating because there's two pretty bad things happened to our family, and it just felt like
But
there
I'm
was
thinking
nothing.
like at least nobody died, right?
We don't.
I mean, like we don't. I mean, Frankie could have died, but she just ran away. I mean, it's not like, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, but I mean, it would have been nice to find her and have her.
We could get another cat. That'd be a cool thing. Maybe we can get one, up soon.
Well, yeah, but Frankie wasn't just a cat. She was Frankie.
Right.
She wasn't a cat. She was a
That's
cat.
true. Yeah. Okay, so what happened there? So I'm trying to fix it, right? I'm trying to paint a silver lining. I'm trying to basically make him. What's going on? I'll just jump in. What's going on is I'm trying to make him feel better, because I'm his dad and I care about him. And actually, I have good intentions. I want to make him feel better. It's not, and so my way of making him feel better is to try and persuade him that it's not all that bad, and that there's another solution. We can get another cat, or it could have been worse, etc. Sorts of things that we do, I think, to fix the problem, or try and fix the problem, because it's just uncomfortable to be there in that place of pain. I don't want him to be sad. And there's all sorts of reasons why I might not want him to be sad, for good and bad. But in order to try and help him not to be sad, I try and fix it, and what I'm really doing there is saying, you shouldn't be sad. In fact, what I'm saying is, there's people who have it way worse. You should feel guilty about feeling so sad. There's at least a danger that I'm implying that to him. Now we're kind of out of time here. We're going to do a few more examples of this. But one of the things I'm just going to share on you a little bit about what we talked about last night, if that's okay. So we were just talking about this last night, and we were kind of joking about the different ways in which we could have gone. Like one would be we're kind of mad at the people who lost our cat. Right? They should not have lost our cat. And but have you ever shared? So one of the things we're going to do is Ollie just sharing. He's kind of really angry at those people, and then I go, yeah, I'm mad. They suck. They're terrible. Have you ever done that where you kind of share something with somebody about your anger, and then they seem to just lose it themselves, and they're kind of over-identifying with you, and they're offering to call a hitman to go out to. It's like, oh, I I was just trying to say I'm angry, and suddenly it's become about the other person's anger, right? And again, you just shut down, and it's like, it's become about you and not me here. What's going on there? And again, I think we probably experienced doing that, and other people doing that with us. But we carried on talking actually about the situation, and something Oliver said was he felt about this issue. He feels very sad about it. We all do. But you were saying you felt you couldn't really talk about it, right? Tell us a little bit of why have you struggled to talk about it?
Well, I feel like earlier you were saying I didn't have permission to express my sadness, because especially here in front of a lot of people, I don't know what other people are going through, and they could be going through stuff a lot worse than me, and I don't want them to hear me complaining about my lost cat and my sick granddad and be like, oh, that's nothing.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be
So
like...
it's that issue of it being like you almost guilty. You that other people have it worse, and you being sad is almost a selfish act, right? Yeah. And I think that's something we struggle with a lot as human beings. And so Oliver also, well, for context here. So in the interact of sharing with somebody and being validated. So if Oliver shares that now with me, and I'm just present with him, and in fact I don't try and answer, there may be nothing to be said other than, I'm sorry you're so sad, or thank you for sharing that with me. Well, that sounds awful. You must be so sad. Okay, just being present in that moment with him in that way validates his sadness. It's saying it's okay to be sad, and it dispels the fear that actually everybody will think that he's being ungrateful and that he could have it way worse. Right? So we have that capacity in that moment of acceptance and empathy to actually validate Oliver's story. And that's so powerful, because then Oliver went on to say, as we were talking about it, he goes, what is it that makes it somehow better when we've shared it? Okay, so regardless of whether I have said anything helpful to him, it feels better once you've shared that sadness or that part of your story with somebody else. Just sharing it makes you feel better. Why is that? And my response was, that's what we're talking about. I don't even know the exact answer to that, except that it's something in this mystery of the incarnation. It's the fact that when we are together, something happens. Something happens. When we actually are able to connect in the way that we were trying to connect, where we hear one another, where we're with one another, where we're not trying to fix one another, where we're just there, somehow we become more human. Somehow it empowers us. Somehow it helps us. It doesn't change the situation necessarily, but perhaps it creates a context where change can happen, where we can start walking a pathway of healing. We can start walking through it, or it just becomes easier to walk through it. So we have this capacity to help one another in these kinds of ways. We have these opportunities that we either take or we quash. We either make that space or we just dismiss it and shrink that space down. What if we were able to practice being compassionately present to people in such a way that people became able to share their story with us, became able to be fully themselves? What if in close relationships we have, where somebody's sharing something, we could have stopped being defensive, or stopped justifying ourselves, or stopped thinking about how does this affect me, and how do I need to navigate this, and just empty that away and just be present to that person. How might that empower our relationships? How might that change our relationships? That's the question I want to leave us with. Let's just say thank you to Ollie. Thanks, Ollie. We've overrun a tad here, so we're just going to close out. Let's pray together. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you that you are present to us. Lord, there's a struggle in that for us because we can't see you. And that just creates a whole sense of mystery. And yet at the same time, Lord, you're present to us imperfection. You are not, there's not an ounce of dysfunctionality about you. There's not an ounce of manipulation or fear or anxiety. You, as that scripture said, you have emptied yourself and you are fully present to us now. So Lord, we just want to lean into you and lean into your grace, your acceptance, with all of our needs, all of our sadness, all of our fear, all of our anxiety. We just want to, Lord, in a kind of silent, almost completely non-verbal way, just share that with you now, be an open book to you. And Lord, I pray that you'll come now and empower us to be those who can empty themselves in this various situations we're going to go into this week. Lord, we think of those close to us, spouses, brothers, sisters, friends, people whose relationship we highly value. Lord, help us to empty ourselves. Help us to be present to them when they're talking, when they're sharing, when they're feeling. So that we can truly listen, that we can truly love them and embrace them without our own interests getting in the way. And Lord, help us to be that to the people who we walk by, the people we work with, the people we have casual conversations with, where an opportunity arises that we might just be present in a compassionate way and create space for them. Lord, may we be compassionate presence in the way that you are compassionate presence to humanity. Lord, may we see in every person the living Christ. May we see God's image in all people and create space for that beauty to be expressed and to grow. Show us the way, Lord, we pray. Fill us with your Spirit now. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we are going to wrap